Okay, so thank you everyone for joining us this afternoon here on Monday the 27th. I'm seeing people slowly pop into the room. I'm not going to do introductions just yet. I'm going to wait for there to be a number of people, but before I do, maybe as a little bit of fun, as you join the chat, you could say where you're dialing in from, so what company and whereabouts in the world. We could see how many different locations, time zones we have on the chat. So I'm staring avidly at the chat, waiting for someone to come in and say, I'm dialing in from Western Australia, or it's 1 a.m. and I'm calling in from the west coast of or the east coast of the US. So is anyone gonna Fleet in Hampshire? Okay, that's everything. It's a good start, Luke. I like that. Okay, so should I do the same? I'll do Watford, Hertfordshire.
The shame is that generally people only know Fleet because it's the first station out of London on the M3.
Yeah, no, I've got to be honest. I've used it for precisely that reason. But you know, there are worse things to be known for. I'll say that. But if anyone else can,
the chat's disabled. It's coming through the. That might be why you're not getting the responses.
I love it. Chat is disabled from Wolverhampton. That's, Paula, a very clever way around it. So thank you, Paula. And I'm guessing someone in my team has just told us that it's that chat is disabled. So hats off to Paula though for finding her way around the technical. Oh, Paula's put her hand up. Hi, Paula. I'm impressed. I am very impressed. Oh, someone's enabled it within Weavr. Fantastic. There we go. So now, who's going to follow Paula's lead and share where we are? Hi, Harriet. Sunny Scotland. Okay, so now we've stretched things out. I want to know whether or not Emily's actually being serious or not, because if Emily's being serious, that's very cool. If we actually have the US on it, I'm going to take you at your word, Emily, and thank you for getting up at this time.
I always find that fascinating. I think it's 10 a.m. though.
Yeah,
makes me feel less bad.
It depends whereabouts it is, isn't it? Oh wow, we have South Africa. So time zone is not too different, but we've now travelled an equally impressive distance. Adrian in Malta. The tree, I feel like that's a pub. I feel like Emily is telling us that she's actually calling from a pub, or maybe she's in her back garden. But either way, thank you very much. And I can see Brixton as well, Norfolk, sunny Norfolk, fantastic. Okay, cool. So I've used that tactic, which I will admit that Luke shared with me to kill a couple of minutes. Emily's not at a pub. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to disparage you, Emily. I feel like that potentially was offensive, and it wasn't meant to be at all.
How to offend your audience in the first 30 seconds of a webinar.
100% effectively accusing people of drinking at lunchtime on a Monday, but maybe that's what you need in order to get through webinar. Emily, we all wish we were in a pub. That's kind of my default position in life. But I will having burnt a little bit of time, maybe it now is the appropriate point at which to dive in. So thank you everyone for joining. My name is Daniel Greiller. I'm the Chief Commercial Officer here at Weavr. I'm here with Luke Fisher, the founder and CEO of MoWork, and I'll ask Luke to introduce himself in a moment. Before I do, I will take the opportunity to thank you all for joining us this afternoon from myriad places around the globe. And I'll say just a little bit about what we're looking to impart this afternoon. Most people would agree with the sense that the fight for talent has never been more fierce than it is today. And actually, it's been said, I've heard it said, that every business is a hiring business, as without a great team, you can't execute on even the best of ideas. And the world of work was undergoing a transformation even before the pandemic. And it's a shift that was accelerated by the pandemic, the rise of remote working, the overall explosion of engagement via digital platforms. It's shifted the power dynamic in the hiring world. In the digital world, people are able to sell their labor almost exponentially to an exponentially larger number of companies. We're no longer restricted by the need to have a manageable commute. And Luke's going to share with us everything that he and the team at MoWork have learned about this changing landscape and what makes for good hiring and retention. Maybe just before I do hand the mic to Luke and ask him to introduce himself and MoWork, I'll quickly introduce Weavr. For those of you who haven't heard of Weavr, we're a leading embedded finance provider. That may be a term that you're familiar with, but I won't take that chance. I'm going to imagine that you've never heard of embedded finance before. Long story short, embedded finance is the placing of a financial product in a non-financial customer journey, experience, or platform. Now, this definition creates a huge overlap with the world of employment and employment benefits. As Luke's about to tell us, flexibility and great experiences are key. And Weavr enables B2B SaaS businesses to embed financial services seamlessly into their product, into their platform. So whether you're looking to automate payments to providers on a marketplace, or you want to add reward allowances to your employee engagement platform, or you're trying to add expense management to an HR information system, Weavr can help. So in short, we make it really easy for businesses to add financial products into their platform and give that brilliant user experience that everyone expects these days in the digital world. And as Luke's about to tell you, understanding what employees really need to be happy is at the heart of what he and the team at MoWork are doing. So without further ado, Luke, I hereby hand you the proverbial mic and ask you to introduce yourself and the team at MoWork and what you're doing.
Cool. Thank you ever so much. So I'm Luke, as you have heard. I run a business called Mo. We help organizations solve one of three challenges typically. One is engaging their people. Two is helping reduce levels of turnover of their employees, that is, rather than their revenue. And then we would also support driving cultural change to enhance performance. And I'll talk to you about a couple of things that are influencing the employee experience, but I can often geek out a little bit when it comes to work and people at work and culture and engagement. So it'd be really useful context for me if you don't mind just posting in the chat briefly. Now we know that it's working. Just the industry that you work in and the function that you work in, just to give me a sense, if you don't mind, of what kind of environment and how you might be approaching some of this stuff. It's quite top level content, but for me, it'd be really useful just to get a gauge as to what kind of spin I should put on the information. So don't be shy. Perfect. Okay, great. So HR, any others? Tech, marketing. Okay, cool. Further education, great. Product. Okay, cool. That makes sense. So there's quite a lot of crossover actually between those three, which is cool. Okay, perfect. At the heart of most of those across HR teams, marketing teams, or product teams is experience. So we're going to talk quite a bit about that too, which is good. So the power is shifting. What's the relevance to this? So I used to work on the consumer side, the marketing side of an organization. And in that work, we were challenged by marketing leaders trying to engage consumers because there seemed to be a real power shift that had happened over the last kind of 10 or 20 years, which was all of the power used to be with the retailer and it transitioned to the consumer, and workers followed the same thread. Okay, so the power used to sit with the employer and it now sits with the employee. But I'll set the context first based upon that retailer and consumer relationship so that hopefully you can understand how the shifts that are now affecting the workplace are following a similar pattern. So the basis for competition for a retailer used to be based primarily around price and convenience, the high street, if you like. So we would spend our time going down to the high street. The basis by which we would compare what options we had were within the vicinity that we lived. And we've often used price as a determinant to therefore understand which one might be better or worse for us to spend our money in. What happened was e-commerce came along, and it meant that convenience could be delivered to your door within hours of you ordering it. And it led to you being in a position in which you both had an explosion of choice, but a lot more optionality when it came to price and other factors that started to convince you whether you should buy from a certain brand or not. What that led to was most organizations shifting focus to experience and how do they integrate across the various channels that they interact with their customers to optimize that experience, whether it's face-to-face, online, via their app, or whatever it might be. That was because of the fact that the power sat with the consumer. And therefore, the more that you can aid personalization and make sure that your product or service was relevant to me as a consumer, the more likely I am to buy. The relevance to the workplace is there's fierce demand for talent, like there was fierce demand, or there is fierce demand for customers. And what you're seeing is that the workplace used to be governed largely by the main factors for where competition was or how people fought for competition, which was, is it within a commutable distance, and are we paying the right amount of salary? So there's many kind of common factors between that commerce marketplace and the talent marketplace. What you've seen is that as the availability of talent has reduced quite significantly, good people are really quite hard to find. And hopefully many of you resonate with that a good member can make or break your team and also your organization. And what we're seeing is that more and more, the basis of the competition is less about where you work, especially since the pandemic, and also less about money. Let that sink in for a second, because most people associate work with money. So who knew? There's more to work than just the money. So the basis for competition now with remote work and the optionality to work anywhere that you want has meant that organizations are relying on differentiating beyond just their price, salary, and convenience, and are now also looking to the experience that they offer their people as a key differentiator to how they attract and retain talent. There's one key difference between those two, the retailer and the employer, though, which is the employer is in a position in which they can't have the experience manifest within their organization in the same way that a retailer might do. So if I can simplify experience management into, in the main, the brand of the organization sets the sense of direction and promise for the organization. It's what you're there for, your purpose, what you believe in, and how you're going to go about delivering something exceptional for people. So purpose, values, and beliefs. How that manifests is only in one of three ways, which is what you look like, what you say, and ultimately what you do. In the retailer context, what you look like and what you say are pretty easy to control. So too is how you act, because you can set service standards, you can mandate your employees or your technologies to serve customers in a certain way. What we tend to find on the inside of the organization, when you're relying on experience or culture, as many people would talk to it in the talent marketplace, is that you can quite easily control what you look like. You've got a wonderful careers page. You've got a really nice office environment. Often control what you say. You know, we've got maybe the luxury of an internal communications team, or we're quite considered in our internal marketing about what we say about the organization and its direction. Challenge that organizations often face when it comes to creating a leading experience is in how you act, because that's driven by your the kind of sphere in which you experience the organization, which is typically your leadership team or your teammates. Okay, so if you're thinking about how are you going to differentiate in this talent marketplace, acknowledging this shift in power, very often you'll default to experience and the things that your people want. What you say, what you look like, perhaps easier to control. How you act is quite a challenging one for you to think through. So the power is shifting. How do you deal with that? What do people care about? If we jump on to the next slide, I just wanted to talk to you a little bit about why people are leaving organizations. So this, I would love to say, is some Mo research, but as a relatively kind of upstart organization that's trying to impact the world, I've relied on a different source, which is McKinsey, which many of you will know as a big organization in the kind of strategy consulting space. They've done a really cool report, and I think it might be shared with you in the chat in a second, that looks at why do people leave organizations and how do you take what was the Great Resignation and transition it to the Great Attraction. There you go. Thank you. There's a really cool section within there that looks at employers not fully understanding why people are leaving organizations. And at the heart of it is the employer's expectation versus the employee's expectation of what you get from work. So running along the bottom axes here, and I appreciate it's pretty small, so you might want to read the report later and rely on the narrative for now, is that organizations often think what matters is adequate compensation and healthcare and some of the traditional benefits that you might be used to. But what employees are actually expecting these days is that they want to feel valued by their manager. They want to feel valued by their organization. They want a sense of belonging. They want to have caring and trusting teammates, and they want the opportunity for advancement. So when you're thinking about the power shifting to the employee and why people might be leaving your own organization and how you might attract some of the best people, give some consideration to these much more emotional factors rather than the logical factors that might be keeping or moving people within the organization. So the consideration that I would ask you to think about as you're looking at the experience that you're creating for your people is one of, what are they really there for? What do people really care about? What is the proposition of work for an employee these days? Because very often we know that it's not just about the money. There's research that backs it up that says that that is true too. So on your side of the equation as the employer, what do you really care about? Is it time, like the traditional employment contract states at the minute, you'll work 40 hours a week in return for money? Is that the core exchange that work is about these days? Or is it actually more a case that you're keen for impact and the employee is keen for opportunities to get some of the kind of core needs that they have from their life satisfied? So as we go on to the last slide, I just think it's worth noting about how you think about rewards, recognition, and benefits within the organization based upon the life cycle stage of the organization and where you're thinking about this in your kind of talent strategy. And I underpin this with, people tend to make decisions based upon emotion and seek to back them up with logic. Okay, so when you're retaining people, often the thing that will send them to consider taking the recruiter's phone call, respond to the email that they get bombarded with on LinkedIn, is often from an emotive place. They've had a negative experience or a sense of frustration that has emerged from somewhere on the retention side. And then as they start exploring, what other jobs are out there and someone's seeking to attract them, they're often trying to validate some of these logical factors, the hygiene factors. Am I going to get paid enough money? Is the benefit stack there? But when it comes back through the cycle, because the employee life cycle is agnostic in many ways to your organization, because they will be leaving yours and joining somebody else's, think clearly through how you're going to retain them. And this will often be through the context of those points that you've just seen. How do you create the environment in which people feel valued by their organization? They feel valued by their manager, they feel that sense of belonging. But in your attraction strategy, how do you give some consideration for what are the hygiene factors that you need to cater for? How do you show your real differentiators from within the organization? If I leave you with one kind of sense of encouragement for the future, and where I think that with all of these things you should look towards in the ideal state, is one of personalization. So what we learned in the consumer market really delivered impact was this sense of a personalized experience for someone that felt like me. If you can give some consideration within your talent strategy to how do you enhance the levels of personalization so that as an employee, I can feel like I access opportunity that is relevant to me in my life. Doesn't mean necessarily just my career, but in my life, you'll go a long way to tapping into the right kind of engagement drivers of the employee. Dan, I'm going to pass back to you now, if that's all right. Hopefully that's given some food for thought for people. If anyone's keen to get to know us, then hit us up at mo.work, and we could probably help you with some of these challenges that you might be facing within your organization. Dan, back to you.
Luke, thank you. Hopefully I speak for everyone listening when I say that a huge amount of that resonated with me, my experiences. And I think it also unearths a lot of the questions that we're, as people leaders and people trying to build organizations, that we're trying to answer as we try and build the companies as we go. We will be doing a question and answers shortly. So for anyone that has any questions based on what Luke said, we've already proven that we can use the Q&A function. Please feel free to put the questions in the Q&A. We will actually start this Q&A process off by kicking off with a poll. So hopefully this should now jump up on your screen to everyone who's listening. And I will ask if everyone can quickly answer the question, assuming you're getting paid fair money, what else matters to you when you're looking for a job? So there's a little bit at the bottom here that says hosts and panelists can't vote. So I don't have to answer that question, which is probably to the good. And I'm currently filling for a few seconds while I wait for everyone else to do it. Luke and I did discuss the matter whether or not I would repeat the question with as many different accents as I could come up with, but we agreed that, well, do you know, before even accusing people of drinking on a Monday morning, we agreed that that might create more offence than was required. So I will not be doing that. Instead of doing that, I'm just going to encourage everyone who hasn't to quickly dive into the poll, as I think we might actually be stuck into some sort of program loop. If we don't complete that poll, I'm not sure that I actually get the answers. So again, I'll just encourage everyone to answer the poll. I will repeat the question. And I think listening to everything that Luke has just said and the importance of non-monetary in the poll or in employment, assuming you are getting paid fair money, what else matters to you when looking for a job? And I'll read out the options: the benefits, flexibility, and that refers to both location and the number of hours being worked, culture, and career development. Now, I can't see anywhere where that's popped up with an answer. So in the absence, here we go. Fantastic. That was classic live TV/radio, waiting to see what was going to happen. I think that's really interesting. Flexibility and culture come out kind of neck and neck in the middle there, and benefits, which is sort of alluding towards the more financial aspect, but not, is the lowest, with career development between. So I think that's really interesting. And again, thank you everyone for taking the opportunity to answer that question for us. Luke, I think maybe now we'll sort of talk a little bit about what we've just heard. So based on your experience, when employees work on their packages they're putting together, to what extent should payroll and compensation management really be taken into account? Or bearing in mind what we've just heard about the importance of flexibility, the importance of culture, how do these different things come into an organization considering its benefits package? And is it the same people, same strategies, same processes, the same benefits? Is that going to be right for everyone? Or how should different people think about this when they're putting together their strategy?
I think you have got two considerations, which is, what do you do centrally and universally as an organization? You have to get the hygiene factor right, which is you need to pay people money, right? You need to be in a position in which you have at least some level of consistency to the expectations that people carry. You know, pensions are mandatory within the UK, for example, unless people opt out. You beyond that, how you create opportunities or flexibility, what we're seeing amongst modern organizations is flexible means more than where you work. It's been popularized over the last 2 years as flexible working means that you could perhaps pick your destination to work in, or pick the place in which you work. But I think being in a position in which you seek to create a level of personalization for what I want for the remainder of your benefits allocation, it will be really key for organizations to think about how they can facilitate that, but also enable it. If I make that real for you, enablement of recognition is a task best done by leaders and teammates of colleagues, not centrally. There's nothing worse that we hear than people that get a generic happy birthday message or well done for being here in the organization for 5 years without any sense of emotional consciousness in the message that comes from them. That's an example of great intentions, but personalization done poorly.
Execution.
So exactly. So how you think about enabling some of those things as an organization is super important, which actually comes down to a question of behavioral and cultural change in how do you equip leaders and teammates with that information and then encourage them to act, rather than it does centrally as an employer. How do you get yourself in a position to execute on that almost anonymously or lacking that personal kind of touch? So I would say, think about it through what's the core offering in which you need to deliver against, which sits in the context of probably a hygiene factor. So if you want to have a look at like a Hertzberg theory for motivation, this is what the benefits and pay exercise is really about, right? Is how do you tap into people's motivation? Pay is the known lever that we typically rely on. Benefits give us a level of extension to that, but typically they're quite logical considerations when you think about work. And a lot of what you heard earlier through the research is that it's these emotive factors that people really care about. It transitions anyone centrally looking at this stuff from one of how do I deliver this program or this enhancement generically for the organization to how do I equip and enable the organization in order to tap into some of these factors that people care about. So I would say that's what we're seeing from the best is unlocking flexibility in the way in which you can utilize the allocation that you get as an employee to redeem what matters most to you. I think you guys could probably help out in that space. And then I think in terms of the enablement piece, there's a big gap in the reward space, I think, about how we tap into that value exchange that is non-monetary for people, because it becomes a cultural task, an enablement task for the central teams rather than it does a thing for them to do.
And you're kind of describing it being holistic, right? It's not done in a silo and it's not done in a corner in an office. It has to be part of the whole piece that you're crafting, right?
Yeah, for sure.
That actually, it's really interesting when we think about some of the other conversations you and I have had. That holistic piece and the rewards and the benefits often comes under the idea of kind of financial wellness, right? So one thing we discussed is, what do you understand by the term financial wellness? And do you see this as being connected with the health meaning of wellness, which we often see in the employee benefits space? And maybe a sort of second part of that is, do you view this area of financial wellness as firstly being in the domain of things that employees should try to help out with? And is it something that can be addressed through an employee benefits program?
Yeah, it's interesting. I noticed one of the attendees is one of our customers, actually, Alex from OVO Energy, and him and I shared a stage with a financial wellness expert last week. And they had a really interesting take on it, and it's made me think about the market very differently, very differently since, which is financial wellness is often thought about in the context of education. So most people that are implementing financial wellness into their organization are often looking at how do we educate our people to be better with their money. Whereas actually the way that this guy talked about it on stage was it's actually about making better financial decisions, and therefore behaving differently is the desired outcome. Education is just part of the process. So I think you loop all the way back around to the same thing, which is if you're aware of what good financial management looks like, you are educated about how to make some of those decisions. It's about the bridge to action that is the real task of financial wellness in my mind. How you can make those action steps simpler, easier, more compelling, I think is the task of the financial wellness industry, which could mean you need to use innovation in open banking to help provide people with insight about different actions that they can take. It could mean that you need to facilitate additional ways for them to manage their money on key purchases that they might want to make in their life. There's a whole host of considerations that go beyond either awareness that there's a problem, education about how to deal with it, and it's actually in the enablement that I think a lot of the challenges exist. Because when you're well informed, but you're unclear on where you go next, or how it can be made easier for you to make some of those key steps that you need to, it often becomes a blocker, and you just loop back around because it's too hard to change your behaviors.
And I used the word holistic earlier. I'll throw another kind of buzzword in, and that's personalization, right? It's the way to do that is not have an app that promotes mindfulness, right? There's going to be lots of or budgeting, right? Maybe it's one of those things for one person, maybe it's something for someone else. So, I think it's that personalization and understanding.
Yeah, there's a question in the chat from George, actually, which talks to the same point, right? Which is, relatively speaking, how important are health benefits to employees? And are there any platforms getting it right? And I think the reason I encourage you to think about personas in your organization that are defined by these sets of common characteristics and how you can please them. For people that are at the stage of life in which they have a family or they are starting to see health issues emerge, health benefit could be vitally important to them. Somebody that's at 19 years old that dropped out of university and just wants to work in an organization for the experience of work probably hasn't given a second thought to a health benefit, Yeah. So I think the reason that I'm championing like personalization as the path, you have to go to deep levels of personalization that, you and I have an entirely different compensation profile to one another. But we can make steps in the right direction, which is promoting a health benefits platform to that 19-year-old that's dropped out of uni, probably campaigning on deaf ears. So it's a question of how do you get yourself to a point in which you can either provide the breadth of choice so that people can opt in and make their own decisions, or how do you provide the flexibility and relevance to people? So are people getting it right? Yes, for some people. And I know it makes a really challenging answer if there's no one size fits all, and the answer generally you default to is it depends. But if you're serious about making an impact on some of these things, like I would really genuinely give consideration to what makes up the dominant population within your organization, what are the things in which they actually care about the most, and how do you serve them really well with that? Often what I see within organizations is that the deployment model of technologies to help and support them is one of it has to be available to everybody. You therefore get charged for everybody having access, but utilization is really poor. It means you either have to make a decision to have everyone have access to it or nobody have access to whatever the thing is. And you're just never going to please everybody with one thing. Like, if you're going to place your bets, try and get smarter with the way that you place your bets by understanding and allowing people to either opt in or craft something for people that they think is relevant.
Yeah, those two last points, right? Opting in and crafting what's relevant for them. We live in a digital world, right? And think of the way in which we interact with almost every other service that we have. You talked earlier about retail, right? Whether or not it's the Amazon experience or the Uber experience or these sort of things, it's so easy to do the bits that you want. And this, we've certainly seen that at Weavr. Companies, there's this trend towards giving choice over how to spend, perks, rewards, allowances, this sort of thing, right? Whether or not it's on company cards or having a platform that allows you to choose the bits that you want, right? Securely spending the budgets that you've been given, rather than having to pay money out of their own pockets and then have to reclaim it afterwards. Maybe have you seen, is there anyone out there that you've seen do really good innovation in that area? Is there anything that you've seen that stands out or comes to mind in that kind of personalization and the ability to craft a great package that's unique to them as an individual?
I mean, it'd be wonderful to give an absolutely shameless plug here, but it feels wrong to do that. So I'll talk to Ovo actually, and Alex, because he's done some great work in this space. Ovo is an experience conscious organization, whether you look at their customers or their employees, and the work that they've done at Ovo is great. Like, you're in a position in which through our platform, they've created an empowerment framework where all employees have the ability to distribute recognition, often associated with reward. From there, employees can go into a store environment in which they can pick whatever is relevant to them. we can equip with both a custom store, so people could take additional days leave or holidays, with access to things like Amazon or Deliveroo or whatever it might be, so people can choose to spend. Some of the heartwarming examples around, September time last year was Alex sharing stories of people buying Clark's shoes because it's the school term, and we're harmed by the cost of living crisis, and people are picking to buy their kids' school shoes with the reward allocation that they've got. And for me, that's how it should be. If that's what you need, if that's what you want, then you should be able to do that. You shouldn't be limited by organizations often trying to limit optionality because of the fact that it creates too much of an administrative nightmare to support that high degrees of choice or personalization. So yeah.
Alex says he sat here nodding a lot, so good to hear that. We've got two more questions, one on the Q&A and one on the chat. Maybe the Q&A one first. Maybe we should have done an explainer in the first instance. Question: an embedded finance company and an employee rewards platform are talking. What's the link here? Before, there's no link between our two companies other than we think that there's interesting areas for collaboration and overlap. So let's just say that, not customers, not clients, nothing like that. I think from my point of view, the link is about the delivery of what good looks like in terms of working out what people want and delivering it to them easily, right? So that's where I see this kind of overlap. I don't know if you want to say anything, Luke, about that as well.
Yeah, I think there is lots of potential overlap. I think what we're seeing is, as the world transition itself from how do you serve the organization best to how do you serve the employee best, embedded finance in our consumer journeys seems like it's everywhere at the minute. Embedded finance in our work journey doesn't seem like it exists at all. So the opportunity for these kind of sorry, my kids have just come in from school and are very lively. These kind of journeys within the employer landscape just aren't really talked about that much. And I think there's some interesting stuff that we could do that we're not quite yet.
I agree. I'll move on to the last question, but maybe the sort of shameless plug my side is, if you think about the consumer experiences we all have, and where Amazon, Uber, Deliveroo, etc., these sort of things, it's not really the same with most business and corporate softwares and experiences. So that's where we believe that we can make that world an awful lot easier, more enjoyable, and ultimately provide better outcomes. The last question here is, or one more question: where do you see employee stock options in the mix of benefits, and how sticky do you see those as being? Luke, I'll let you go first, and then I'll share my 2 pennies on that afterwards.
I think they are, both from experience internally, as a Series A company that are trying to attract and retain great people, but also as we look at the benefit space. I think they are as effective as the understanding that your people are with them. What I mean by that, if I unpack it a bit, is they can be highly effective, but before the individuals that really get the value that they're unlocking. For those that don't, or they can't see it becoming tangible quickly enough, we live in this world of immediate gratification, right? Rather than delayed gratification. All the time that people can't see the benefit quickly enough, you run the risk that it becomes something that they might never see. And therefore it can quickly be kind of deprioritized in their mind of how this makeup of their comp and benefits is really benefiting them. For the smart ones, often engineers, you see a consideration for them joining on a decent salary, but earlier stage companies, moving jobs every 3 years once the vesting period's closed out, and building an investment portfolio of companies pretty quickly. So for the right people, really effective. For those that don't really understand, which I would sadly say is probably in the masses, less effective would be my steer.
I think that's a really comprehensive answer. Speaking for myself, at the ripe old age of 40, when I look back on my career, at about 30, I took a deliberate decision to go and work in startups for kind of exactly the reason that you just mentioned. And I've I've worked at one startup now who got bought by MasterCard. I worked at another startup who is kind of on the track to IPO, and now I'm here at Weavr. So in each of those, so I've seen some benefit to that, and I'm hoping to receive more in the future. But I think it's important that you both, that there's clarity around how it works, and that there's good understanding around how it works. I also think that done well, you create events along the way. For the point that you're making about the kind of jam tomorrow can be a little bit, it loses its shine after a while, right? So we're close to the top of time. I am just going to put one more call out if anyone has got any additional questions that they'd like to ask. From my point of view, I think we've covered a huge amount of ground already, but I'm happy to go all the way around the world, from South Africa over to America. If there's anyone else that wants to take the opportunity to grill Luke or myself, I think Luke has done a sterling job of explaining how to do engagement, almost in kind of talent management, right in the world we find ourselves in today. Any other questions? If there's no other questions, Luke, I might give you that horrible hospital pass of just saying, is there anything else that you want to say or share before we leave?
I have a question for you.
Okay.
Are we allowed to flip the script?
Of course, always.
As he says, taking a big gulp nervously. So you know the embedded finance space far better than I do. What do you think is the best possible application of embedded finance in the employee journey, given what we've talked about in the question that we got earlier? Like, what is the impact that you think that you could have for employees?
I think it's the ability to create something really personal and dynamic. So we have a customer called Thanks Ben. They create benefits packages. They give people the opportunity to choose from a series of providers, and to with a series of clicks, you created this this package that that is exactly what you as the individual wanted, right? So the point I'm making is the corporate gets to say to their customer, look, here's the world of the possible, what's right for you, right? And I think that shows real care, and I think it's not easy, that kind of flexibility. So enabling the really easy provision of a tailored solution, I think that's a great example of embedded finance making a benefits proposition really, really powerful. So I appreciate you flipping the script on me at the end there. But I think that's, it's the enablement of the curation of a package in a digital environment. So really seamlessly doing that.
Cool. Thanks.
Brilliant. I think we're maybe 100 seconds away from the top of time. So I will just give the one last shout out to the audience if anyone wants to ask another question. If not, I will take this opportunity to, again, Luke, thank you. I think you've shown us amazing insight today, and I think, as is advocated from the fact that you have customers on the webinar who have shared how strong you are with what you're doing, what you're enabling. So I think that's kudos to you and the team at my work, and I'll just thank everyone else on the call for joining. If anyone wants to get in contact, here's the details. Luke is a very accessible person on LinkedIn as well, so he won't mind, hopefully, me throwing him under the bus if you want to
no, do that. Check out Mo. You should find us at mo.work, or me, obviously Luke Fisher on LinkedIn. Would love to hear from you, and also know whether this was good and interesting. So let us know. I'd love to hear from you.
Well, very kind of Vera to say that it was a fantastic webinar. So let's finish by me patting you and I on the back, Luke, and saying thanks from Vera and on the chat.
Good stuff. Thanks ever so much. See you later.
Everyone, bye.
Bye.